Back with another episode of Pottawattamie County Roots. Hi, I'm Todd Studer. Hope you had a great weekend. I know I did. The Celebrate CB Parade was a huge hit, and you can even see the live webcast of that parade. Well, it's not live anymore. It was recorded on Saturday, but you can find that on our YouTube channel. Also, we have been getting out into farmers markets, and we're going to talk about farmers markets all across Southwest Iowa. This is one of those subjects, it sounds very simple until you actually stop and think about why these things continue to exist in a world where convenience has taken over nearly every part of modern day life. Because if convenience alone determined everything, farmers markets probably would have disappeared a long time ago. Large grocery stores are faster. Online ordering is easier. You can have your groceries delivered directly to your house now. You don't even have to speak to another human being. Yet every spring and summer, communities all over the region are organizing farmers markets, and people still show up to them week after week. Council Bluffs, their market is every Thursday evening at Bayless Park. Avoca is running its market on Wednesday evenings downtown. Missouri Valley has a Thursday market at the Welcome Center area. Treynor will be operating Tuesday evenings at the Community Center Green Space. Glenwood will have a Wednesday evening farmers market near the Courthouse Square. Walnut is scheduling farmers markets this year. We'll be talking with people about that later on, and that's going to be happening on Highland Street. What I find really interesting about all of this is not just the fact that produce is being sold. What I find fascinating is the fact that communities still clearly believe there is value in creating places where people physically gather together on a regular basis. I think one reason markets are continuing to exist is because human beings are not actually built to live entirely through convenience. We like convenience right up until the point where life begins feeling disconnected and kind of empty. There's a difference between efficiency and fulfillment. Modern life, it's become incredibly efficient. You can order almost anything from your phone. You can communicate instantly with people without ever seeing them face to face. And you can stream entertainment endlessly without leaving your house. But efficiency does not automatically create community, and it does not necessarily create memorable experiences either. Farmers markets work differently because they require physical presence. You actually have to go there. You walk around, you see people, you stand in line beside strangers, you hear conversations, you smell food, often cooking somewhere nearby, kids running around. Somebody is carrying flowers, somebody else is holding a bag full of vegetables, and somebody's standing there talking to a vendor longer than they probably intended because the conversation turned into something personal instead of transactional. Those little moments sound insignificant as an individual, but collectively, they're part of what makes public life feel alive. One thing I noticed while looking through the schedules of these farmers markets is nearly all of them happen in the evening hours during the middle of the week. Now, that feels important because we're not isolated weekend festivals where people show up once and then forget about them. These are recurring, weekly rhythms built directly into the normal structure of community life. Somebody gets off work, heads downtown. Families stop by after supper. People build the market into their routines. Once something becomes routine, it begins shaping the feel of a community, almost without people noticing it. I also think there's something psychologically different about environments where nobody is in a tremendous hurry. Grocery stores are built around speed. Get in, get your items, get out. Farmers markets unfold at a slower pace. People browse instead of rushing. They stop and look around, and they stand and they visit. There's no pressure to move immediately to the next thing. In a culture where nearly every system is designed around speed and efficiency, environments that naturally slow people down begin to feel unusual. And honestly, maybe that slower pace is part of the reason people keep coming back. Not because farmers markets are somehow magical or because they have solved every problem that are facing small towns. They don't do that. But because they do create a type of public atmosphere that's become less common in modern life. There are a few places now where people casually interact without some larger obligation attached to it. Farmers markets remain one of those places. You just show up, and for a little while, the community becomes visible to itself again. Pottawattamie County Roots brought to you by Dave Lawrence, your Edward Jones financial advisor. Learn how he can help you reach your financial goals. Visit edwardjones.com for more. Edward Jones, member SIPC. On Pottawattamie County Roots, we explore the places that make our region home and the people who keep them connected. That is why we are proud to feature Marnie Elkhorn Communications, your local communications provider serving Marnie, Elkhorn, Walnut, Avoca, and other southwest Iowa towns with high-speed fiber internet, reliable phone service, and TV options built for rural living. With real local support and unlimited data plans, you get speeds up to 1 gig to work, stream, and stay in touch with family and neighbors. Visit metc.net to learn more and get connected today. Something else that's very obvious when looking at these farmers markets around southwest Iowa is how strongly they are tied to downtown identity. Nearly every market is positioned directly inside areas community clearly want people spending time in. Council Bluffs uses Bayless Park in the center of downtown. Avoca runs its market through the downtown Main Street district. Glenwood, its market is near the Courthouse Square. Walnut uses Highland Street downtown. Missouri Valley's market connects to the Welcome Center and Historical Village area. None of those locations feel like an accident. For a long time in small-town America, downtown areas were not just business districts. They were the center of public life itself. People naturally crossed paths there because daily routines required it. You went downtown for groceries, hardware, banking, restaurants, pharmacies, barbershops, just about everything connected to ordinary life. Public interaction happened naturally because people physically occupied the same spaces all throughout the day. Over time, a lot of that changed. Larger retail centers pulled activity outward. Online commerce reduced foot traffic almost everywhere. Small towns across America watched parts of their downtown activity shrink over the decades. I think communities understand something important when they place events like farmers markets directly into downtown areas. They understand that public spaces only feel alive when people consistently use them. Buildings alone do not create atmosphere. Activity creates atmosphere. You can have beautiful downtown architecture, historic buildings, renovated sidewalks, decorative lighting, all those things. But if nobody is physically there, the space is empty. Farmers markets temporarily reverse that because they fill public spaces with movement and interaction, and there's something visually important about that. When people see downtown areas full of activity, the community feels healthier, even if only for a few hours. You see people walking around carrying produce or baked goods, and you see families stopping to eat at food trucks. You hear music playing somewhere nearby. You see children running around public spaces. Suddenly, downtown feels less like a collection of buildings and more like an active part of community life again. What I find interesting is that these markets are not trying to compete directly with giant retail systems on efficiency. They can't do that. You're never going to walk into a farmer's market and have the same inventory or convenience as a major grocery chain. It's not the purpose. The purpose is much more connected to atmosphere and local identity. Every one of these markets feels shaped by the personality of the town itself. Council Bluffs is going to feel different than Walnut. Walnut different than Treynor, and Treynor different from Missouri Valley. That individuality still comes through because the markets are embedded directly into the communities where they operate. There's also something interesting about the facts that many of these markets are connected to spaces already carrying symbolic importance inside the community. Bayless Park already functions as a recognizable gathering place in Council Bluffs. Courthouse squares historically represent the civic center of county seat towns like Glenwood. Main Street districts represent local business identity. By placing markets into those spaces, communities reinforce the idea that these locations still matter. I think people underestimate how much repeated public activity shapes the emotional feel of a town over time. A single event doesn't change much. Repeated weekly activity begins changing expectations. People start assuming downtown will be active on certain evenings. Businesses begin adjusting around that activity. Residents begin building routines around it. None of that happens overnight, but repeated patterns slowly shape the way communities experience themselves. And honestly, there's something reassuring about seeing public spaces still actively used in an era where so much interaction now happens digitally. Physical gathering still matters because communities ultimately exist in physical spaces, not in online spaces. One aspect of these farmers markets that I think deserves more attention is the role they play for small vendors and independent producers, because when most people picture farmers markets, they usually think almost entirely about produce. Obviously, produce is a part of it, but when you actually look at the types of vendors that are taking part around these markets in southwest Iowa, you realize they involve a much wider range of small-scale entrepreneurship. Many people just probably assume that. You can see baked goods, honey, flowers, handmade crafts, soaps, candies, jams, breads, prepared foods, food trucks, meats, eggs, all kinds of locally produced products that may never appear inside a larger commercial system. What interests me about that is the fact that these markets create a public space where smaller, independent vendors can directly interact with customers without needing the infrastructure of a permanent storefront. Not everybody trying to build some type of business has the resources to immediately open a commercial location. Renting space, maintaining inventory, paying utilities, staffing a business, all those things require enormous financial commitment. Farmers markets create a smaller entry point. Somebody can bring products directly to the public, interact face-to-face with customers, and begin building recognition gradually over time. There's also something much more personal about that type of interaction because customers are not dealing with a corporation or anonymous supply chain. They're dealing directly with the person connected to the product. If somebody is selling homemade bread, the person standing there probably baked it. If somebody's selling honey, there's a good chance they maintain the hives themselves. If somebody is selling produce, flowers, crafts, or baked goods, customers often have direct access to the person who created it. That changes the feel of the transaction completely, because people naturally become curious when products feel connected to actual human beings instead of simply appearing on shelves. Conversations start happening. Somebody asks how something was made. Somebody asks about growing conditions. Somebody asks what products are most popular. Suddenly, the interaction becomes more than a simple exchange of money for goods. I also think there's something important about the unpredictability built into farmers markets because modern retail systems are extremely standardized. You walk into a major chain store almost anywhere in America and the experience feels largely identical. Same products, same layouts, same atmosphere. Farmers markets operate differently because inventory changes all the time. Vendors vary week to week. Seasonal availability changes. Weather affects participation. The entire environment feels less controlled and less predictable. That unpredictability creates a sense of discovery that modern retail often lacks. Somebody may show up planning to buy vegetables, end up leaving with homemade bread or local honey or flowers or some product they were not expecting to find. There's no guarantee every booth will always be there. There's no guarantee the exact same products will appear every week. The experience remains flexible and constantly changing. Food trucks also add another interesting layer because they shift markets further away from simple shopping and closer to public gathering. Once people can eat there, sit around, listen to music, and spend time socially, the market stops functioning strictly as a retail environment. It becomes part of people's evening plans. Communities like Treynor and Avoca, incorporating food vendors and entertainment into their market structure, shows that organizers understand atmosphere matters just as much as products. And honestly, I think small independent vendors matter more than people sometimes realize. Independent businesses tend to give communities personality. Large corporations create consistency. Small independent businesses create individuality. Farmers markets remain one of the few places where communities can still visibly showcase local creativity, local production, and local entrepreneurship all in one public space. Another thing that really stood out to me while thinking about these farmers markets is how disconnected most people have become from food production itself. Many people's food exists almost entirely as a finished product sitting inside a store. You walk into a grocery store, grab what you need, check the price, and you leave. Most of the process that brought the food there remains completely invisible. You don't see planting. You don't see harvesting. You don't see weather conditions affecting crops. You don't see the labor involved. The entire system is designed to make food appear consistently available regardless of season or local growing conditions. Farmers markets interrupt that separation a little bit. They reconnect people directly to seasonal production. Suddenly, people become more aware of timing. Sweet corn arrives when sweet corn arrives. Tomatoes improve during certain parts of the summer, and different products appear and disappear depending on weather, growing conditions, and that time of year. Instead of every product existing year-round in exactly the same form, availability becomes tied to actual agricultural rhythms again. I think there is value in that because seasonal awareness changes the way people think about food. Modern retail systems intentionally remove seasonality as much as possible because consumers expect constant availability. Farmers markets naturally operate differently because local growing conditions still matter. A hot summer matters, rainfall matters, timing matters. You begin noticing those things when products are directly connected to local production instead of massive distribution systems. There's also something visually different about food in farmers markets because products often look less standardized. Grocery stores depend heavily on visual consistency. Products are selected, sorted, packaged, and displayed according to commercial expectations. Farmers markets feel less polished and more direct. Produce varies in size and appearance. Packaging is often simpler. Products feel physically connected to the people producing them rather than heavily processed through large commercial systems. I think people are drawn to that authenticity, even if they can't always articulate exactly why. Human beings generally like feeling connected to real processes and real people. When food becomes entirely abstract and disconnected from production, something gets lost psychologically. Farmers markets restore at least part of that visibility. You can physically see the people associated with the products. That creates a different type of relationship between customer and food. Finding the right care for a loved one can feel overwhelming. Assisted Living Locators is here to help. Jean Bonker brings more than 30 years of experience serving families and has personally navigated the challenges of elder care. She understands the questions, the emotions, and the weight of these decisions. Jean becomes your advocate, guiding you through options with clarity, compassion, and personal support every step of the way. Call Assisted Living Locators at 402-690-5467 and move forward with confidence. Are you looking to grow your business or bring new jobs and investments to Southwest Iowa? Advance Southwest Iowa Corporation is the economic development organization for all of Pottawattamie County. Advance connects entrepreneurs, innovators, and established companies with resources, incentives, and strategic support to launch, expand, and thrive right here in our region. From site development to small business programs and community partnerships, Advance Southwest Iowa helps build a stronger local economy. Visit advancesouthwestiowa.com to learn more and get involved. Something else I noticed is how often these markets combine agriculture with entertainment and public gathering. Council Bluffs includes live entertainment, also family activities. Missouri Valley incorporates themed events and kids' activities. Avoca includes music and community programming. That combination is interesting because historically, agricultural communities often tied food production directly into public celebrations and seasonal gatherings. Harvest festivals, county fairs, community picnics, all of those traditions connected food, agriculture, and public life together. Farmers markets feel like a smaller, modern version of that same idea. They turn food production into something completely visible again in the public, instead of entirely hidden behind commercial systems. Kids walking through a market, they can actually see vegetables, flowers, and baked goods, and everything else that's connected directly to vendors standing there in front of them. That visibility, it can shape understanding in subtle ways over time. I also think these markets remind people that agriculture still remains deeply connected to Southwest Iowa's identity, even as fewer people work directly in farming than in previous generations. Agriculture still shapes the landscape, economy, and culture of this region, whether people think about it consciously or not. Farmers markets make that connection visible in a direct public way because they bring products tied to local production directly into the center of community life. And honestly, in a world where more and more experiences happen digitally or through invisible systems, there's something grounding about physically seeing where at least some products actually come from. So as I looked through all of these farmers markets across our region, one thing I kept thinking about was how important recurring traditions are in the emotional identity of communities. Because communities are not held together only by infrastructure or economics. Communities are held together by shared rhythms, repeated experiences, and public memory. People remember the events and routines that became woven into the structure of everyday life. That is part of why recurring seasonal events matter more than people sometimes realize. At one time, event can be entertaining, but repeated annually or weekly, tradition becomes part of how people mentally experience a place. Farmers markets fall into that category because they return every year and operate repeatedly throughout the season. Thursday evenings in Council Bluffs begin carrying associations tied to the market. Mondays in Avoca develop their own rhythm. Tuesdays in Treynor become associated with the market atmosphere at the community center. Over time, those repeated patterns stop feeling temporary and begin feeling expected. I think memory plays a larger role in community identity than people often recognize, because when people describe the places they grew up with or the towns they feel emotionally connected to, rarely do they describe the infrastructure first. They describe experiences. They describe routines. They describe traditions. They remember the football games, county fairs, parades, church dinners, community festivals, all the downtown events, and the repeated activities that create a sense of familiarity over time. Farmers markets naturally fit into that pattern because they create recurring seasonal memories. Families bring children repeatedly throughout the summer. People begin recognizing vendors. Friends run into each other regularly. Kids associate warm evenings with walking through downtown markets, and even something as simple as carrying vegetables back to the car after sunset becomes part of the emotional texture of summer in a small town. What interests me is that none of these experiences are individually dramatic. That is not how community memory usually works. Community memory forms through repetition. It forms through ordinary experiences repeated enough times that they become emotionally familiar. Somebody may not consciously think a farmer's market changed their life, but years later, they may still remember walking through downtown on summer evenings while music played and vendors lined the sidewalks. I also think recurring traditions create stability in a culture that increasingly feels unstable and constantly changing. Technology is changing quickly. Businesses come and go. Media cycles move constantly. Public attention shifts every few hours now. Repeated seasonal traditions create continuity. People know roughly what to expect. The market comes back every summer. The town gathers again. The routines return. There's comfort in that predictability because human beings generally like rhythms that feel stable and recognizable. Communities function better emotionally when people feel connected to recurring public experiences that are larger than themselves. Farmers markets may seem small on the surface, but repeated public rituals often matter precisely because they are ordinary. They become woven into the background structure of community life. I also think there's something meaningful about the fact that these markets remain accessible across generations. Grandparents, parents, children, teenagers, young couples all occupy the same space. Modern life often separates people heavily by age groups and interests, but farmers markets tend to feel more blended. Multiple generations walk through the same environment together because the experience itself is simple enough that almost anyone can take part. And honestly, after spending time looking into all of these markets around our region, I think that may be one of the most important things they provide. They create repeated shared experiences in a physically public space, not digitally, not individually, publicly, and in person. Communities ultimately become stronger when people continue sharing physical spaces together over long periods of time. Farmers markets may seem simple on the surface, but sometimes the simplest recurring traditions end up carrying more emotion and weight than anybody fully realizes at the time. Well, there you go, the farmers markets in our area. I hope you enjoyed it. My name is Todd Studer. Don't forget, click like, click share, click follow. Whatever you can do is going to help spread the word about what's happening here in our region, and we can get that out even further across our platforms. My name is Todd Studer, and we'll see you back here tomorrow morning.